Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tian Yu. Coming up in this edition, Lee Jae-myung has taken the oath of office as South Korea's new president, marking the return of a liberal administration for the first time since 2022. Gaza's 8 distribution centers will remain closed as part of a reorganization effort following recent chaos. The U.S. has raised tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50%, doubling the previous rate. We begin in Asia. Lee Jae-myung has become the new president of South Korea. The country's 21st president took the oath of office in the National Assembly building Wednesday morning, formally beginning his single 5-year term. Chinese President Xi Jinping had sent a congratulatory message saying China is willing to keep pursuing win-win cooperation with South Korea to advance the strategic cooperative partnership. Lee has named presidential campaign co-chair Kim Min-seok as prime minister. He also named top secretaries, including the presidential chief of staff and national security advisor. Lee's victory in Tuesday's snap presidential election came 6 months after his predecessor Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration, which threw South Korea into disarray. The new president's supporters are expecting him to bring stability and development to the country. Sheng Ham has more from Seoul.
As if the next president is entering the halls of the National Assembly, we won't see the regular pomp and circumstance that we typically see at inaugurations, both out of necessity, since he's immediately taking the presidency without a transition, but also as a symbol of austerity, that ceremony doesn't matter and that he's more focused on results. But really, if you look at the election turnout, the fact that with a near record voter turnout and nearly 50% of the vote, there's a clear mandate from the electorate that the country wants to move on from the political chaos from the past 6 months. And Mr. Lee has said time and time again that he is someone who gets things done. And that was clear in his brief appearance in front of supporters immediately after it was clear that he was going to win the election.
국민을 크게 통합시키는 대통령의 그 책임을
I would never forget the duty of a president to unite the people. I will fulfill the first mission the people have entrusted to me, which is to overcome the insurrection and make sure there'll be no military coup that threatens the people with the weapons entrusted by them. I'll look for dialogue and communication between the South and the North and find a way to coexist and cooperate to find a path to shared prosperity.
So whether he'll be able to seek that national cohesion or unity, or whether he'll resort to the political revenge or retaliation that we see typically in Korean politics is something that we'll all be watching out for. I think internationally, people are still trying to digest this election win. Domestically, I think the election results speak for themselves, starting with, of course, his main opposition candidate, the opponent, Kim Min-seok of the conservative camp, immediately conceding victory when it appeared that Mr. Lee was going to win this election, as a clear sign to also quiet any sort of allegations or suspicions of any election fraud. I was at that gathering of Lee and his supporters, and there's a lot of hope and optimism for the next 5 years for the country.
In this election, which served as a judgment on the insurrection crisis, the opposition should have won by a landslide. So while I'm pleased with the result, the fact that the margin wasn't overwhelmingly large also reminds me that we still face many challenges ahead. It's a day that brings joy, but at the same time, it is a day that calls for renewed determination.
President-elect Lee Jae-myung's core message has been pragmatism, and pragmatic policies must be practical and useful. I believe his first priority will be to revive our economy.
He's mentioned time and time again that the economy is going to be at the top of his priority and in the list of items that he'll be tackling as president.
That was Sheng Ham reporting. Turning to the Middle East, the Israel and U.S.-based Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says its distribution centers will be closed, warning people not to go to the sites. At least 27 Palestinians were killed as they headed towards an aid hub on Tuesday. The international community of the Red Cross says over 150 were injured. The Israeli army says its forces fired warning shots at what it describes as suspects who approached them near the aid distribution point. An Israeli military spokesperson has warned Gaza residents against moving in the areas leading to aid sites, deeming them as combat zones. The UN has rejected a new aid distribution system, saying it does not address Gaza's mounting hunger crisis and allows Israel to use aid as a weapon. Rami Amagari has more from Gaza City.
The place that the center is at is controlled by the Israeli army, and it is the distance between the place where the crowds should be gathered and the center itself, or the distribution center itself, is about 800 to 1 kilometer, 800 meters to 1 kilometer actually. So this Israeli narrative towards this can be averted by the Israeli army by allowing the people, or by letting the people to stay where the Israeli army wants them to stay, rather than shooting them deadly and killing hundreds of them. That's according actually to local Palestinian officials, local Palestinian observers here in the Gaza Strip. This is the latest among those killed during these Israeli actions against those seeking that aid at that center. But in terms of other Israeli actions in the territory, we can see a number of new Israeli actions that have not been precedented. In the middle actually of the day, an Israeli airstrike pounded to the ground a 4-story building in the Nusayrat refugee camp, killing at least 3 people, including one child.
That was Rami Amagari reporting. In the Americas, the United States has doubled its tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order increasing levies on the two metals from 25% to 50%. The tariff increase took effect on Wednesday. Karina Mitchell has more from New York.
We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. Nobody's going to get around that.
U.S. President Donald Trump vowing before a group of U.S. steelworkers in Pittsburgh to double tariffs tied to steel and aluminum imported into the United States, further ratcheting up global trade tensions and slowing down the world economy. The announcement comes after the White House in March first imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imported into the United States, a move that has hurt both manufacturers and consumers. Reaction over the intended increase was swift from some key economies, including the European Union, United Kingdom, Canada, and Germany. But on Truth Social, Trump touted his own tariff strategy, saying, because of tariffs, our economy is booming. Financial analyst Stephen Cates disagrees, saying history has shown how unsuccessful steel and aluminum tariffs were in the first Trump administration and under President George W. Bush.
And in both cases, they did damage to the U.S. economy. Now, they protect steelworkers, which is great for steelworkers, but they have grievous downstream impacts that impact consumers and impact other manufacturers and overall increase everybody's costs.
A new report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development shows worldwide growth is now expected to slow to 2.9% in 2025, down from a previous forecast of 3.1%, in part due to trade barriers. While Trump says the increase will protect steelworkers in the U.S., American consumers could be the collateral damage, with potential price hikes possible among a range of products as businesses try to navigate higher costs. That includes everything from cars and appliances to things like soda and canned food in the grocery aisles. Kate says if President Trump really wants to help both steelworkers and consumers, there are alternatives to tariffs.
If we want to protect a domestic industry, subsidies might be the better option because it does offer a break for consumers in terms of the costs remain the same or go down, and it still offers a protection to the domestic industry and protects the ability of steelworkers to maintain or expand their industry.
That was a report on the U.S. doubling its tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says equality and respect are the prerequisites for exchanges between the country and the United States, and that dialogue and cooperation are the only correct choice for bilateral ties. He made the remarks while meeting with David Perdue, the new U.S. ambassador to China in Beijing. Yo-Yan has more.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi welcomed U.S. Ambassador to China David Perdue to Beijing, saying he hopes Perdue will serve as a trustworthy communicator, a mediator of differences, and a promoter of cooperation. Wang said China-U.S. ties now stand at a crucial juncture. He noted that after trade talks in Geneva, China has honestly implemented the consensus reached by both sides. He believes recent negative moves by the U.S. undermined China's legitimate rights and interests. The Chinese Foreign Minister said Beijing firmly opposes those measures and hopes Washington will work together with China and create necessary conditions for bringing China-U.S. relations back on track. Perdue said U.S. President Donald Trump has great respect for Chinese President Xi Jinping, adding that it's essential for the two heads of state to maintain positive and constructive interactions. The U.S. ambassador to China added he looks forward to maintaining close contacts with the Chinese side in the spirit of mutual respect and listening. David Perdue arrived in Beijing this May to assume office as the new U.S. ambassador to China. His arrival coincided with Beijing and Washington's agreement to a 90-day trade truce in their ongoing dispute. Earlier, Chinese Foreign Ministry said Beijing will provide convenience for him to perform his duties, adding that China always views bilateral relations based on the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation, and hopes Washington to work with Beijing in the same direction.
That was Yo-Yang reporting. Finally, in Africa, villagers living near wildlife parks in Zimbabwe often have to make noise and start fires to drive away elephants that stray outside parks and raid their fields. But technology is helping them monitor elephant movement and warning them when the animals are nearing human settlements. Farai Maktuya has more.
In 2024, 16 elephants in Hwange National Park had GPS tracking collars fitted around their necks. The gadgets are now providing hourly updates on their movements. The data is useful for conservationists trying to preserve a habitat that is under pressure due to the growing animal population.
16 is really a good number because if you feed one collar in a herd of 10, on average, which is basically the average head size of elephants, so we are basically tracking the movement of probably 160 elephants plus. There's also a human-wildlife conflict lens to it, where we want to assist communities to detect possibilities of conflict early.
Villages in communal areas adjacent to the park have frequently had their crops damaged, and some have been maimed and killed by elephants that have strayed out of the park in search of food and water. The Earth Ranger software tracking tool has a virtual geofence marking the boundary of the national park.
From this dashboard, people here can see when elephants are encroaching into human settlements, so they can warn those communities to take necessary precautions.
We try to identify youths who are still very energetic, who are also literate, who can also perform some of the demanding roles of patrolling around the buffer zone areas where the boundaries of the protected areas and where the communal land starts. And we've provided the basic equipment, the basic knowledge for them to understand and appreciate behavior of problem wildlife species like elephants, like lions.
Mitigating human-wildlife conflicts has become a top priority given the overpopulation of elephants. Hwange National Park is home to 45,000 jumbos, 3 times more than its capacity. Authorities say the collars have aided other conservation efforts.
And it also helps us even to detect things like poaching. If the elephant is no longer moving, it means researchers can easily detect that it has stopped for quite a long period and becomes a concern.
Zimbabwe has recently registered progress in anti-poaching efforts, success it hopes to extend to reducing human-wildlife conflict.
That was Farah Makhtuya reporting. Now recapping today's headlines. Lee Jae-myung has taken the oath of office as South Korea's new president, marking the return of a liberal administration for the first time since 2022. Gaza's 8 distribution centers will remain closed as part of a reorganization effort following recent chaos. The U.S. has raised tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50%, doubling the previous rate. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tianyu. Thank you for listening.